Hey, Chris.
Hi, Ross. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm fine. I like your sweater.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, even though you can't see it, what amazing telepathic powers you have.
It's very becoming.
Well, I appreciate it. I really like the moose antlers you're wearing right now. No, guessed wrong. Well, anyway, I'm Ross Douthat. I'm a senior editor at The Atlantic, but I'm here in my capacity as National Review's film critic, and I'm joined by...
I'm Chris Orr. I'm a senior editor at The New Republic and online film critic.
And we're going to be talking about the Oscars, which should be taking place about 48 hours after this Blogging Ed session goes live. So I thought we would start by doing a really quick segment where we just run through all of the categories and look at the nominees and say, make our predictions for who will win, say who we think should win, and maybe say who we think should have been nominated. Does that sound good to you, Chris?
That sounds like a great idea.
Good. Well, fortunately, I happen to have a copy of the latest Entertainment Weekly with the fetching Miss Tyra Banks on the cover. So I'm going to use their rundown. Unfortunately, neither the Atlantic nor the New Republic saw fit to publish a list of Oscar nominees, so we can't use either of our own magazines. But so let's kick things off with Best Original Screenplay, where the nominees are Juno, Lars and the Real Girl, Michael Clayton, Ratatouille, and The Savages. So who do you think is going to win in this category, Chris?
Yeah, I think this is probably the second easiest category of the night after Best Actor. I think Diavlog has this one sewn up. It's whatever the other contestants are. I think tend to be a little weak. You know, Lars and the Real Girl is not a movie that a lot of people saw and was not. You know, it was a good movie, but was not a great movie.
So you
and Ratatouille,
like
I don't really think that the script was the reason for Ratatouille's great success. So I think this is a pretty easy one. It would be a big surprise if anyone other than Diavlog won. What do you think?
I agree. I mean, I think Juno had a somewhat show-offy screenplay that a lot of people have made fun of. I actually just saw online a actually pretty funny parody of Diavlog Cody's next screenplay, complete with notes in the margins that are all like, this is a great opportunity to coin a catchphrase, like "That's so Armada" or something. But that said, that's often a sign of a winner that people are people are parodying it and so on. And I basically think that would be the right choice. I'm not a huge Michael Clayton fan, but I did actually like the screenplay for the movie. I thought the dialogue worked very well. So that would.
I agree, and a tremendous emotional payoff scene at the end. Really, just one of the more emotionally satisfying payoff scenes in a relatively conventional film. I think in a long time. Really, just whatever. It's a movie that final moment when Clinton traps
screws over right. Yeah. Well, we won't give it away just yet. We'll get to Michael Clayton soon enough. But so is there anyone in this category any screenplays you thought were just robbed that should have been nominated?
No, I certainly wouldn't say robbed. There were a couple of screenplays that I thought were better than some of the ones that might have been nominated. I thought the screenplay for Before the Devil Knows You're Dead was very strong.
I agree.
The movie had flaws, but I thought it was an extremely tight, sharp screenplay. I'm an enormous fan of Once. I don't think it really had much shot of getting nominated for anything other than song, but this is the one other category where I think, there might have been an outside shot. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was just a magical gem of a tiny movie, the little Irish movie Once. So I would have loved it if it had gotten a nomination, but it's certainly no surprise that it didn't. But otherwise, nothing really that came to mind. That now it may be that you suggest something and I say, oh, of course I hadn't thought of that. But
no, I don't actually have any great suggestions in this category, which suggests that it wasn't a tremendously strong year for sort of films where you looked at them and said that was a brilliant screenplay.
Right. Well, or at least I do think that the adapted screenplay category this year is much stronger.
Don't jump the gun. We're going to get there next. Let me turn the page of Entertainment Weekly to Best Adapted Screenplay, where your choices are Atonement, Away from Her, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly, There Will Be Blood, and No Country for Old Men. And here, I think what will win, in my view, will be No Country for Old Men. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. Seems to be the front runner at least.
And do you concur with that?
I do. I thought it was a terrific adaptation, and it actually made me hope that the Coens consider doing more adaptations in the future. It's really their first sort of straight adaptation. I mean, you know, they borrowed bits of "O Brother, Where Art Thou" as loosely as one could imagine from the Odyssey, but this is really and Miller's Crossing was borrowed a bit from a couple of Dashiell Hammett stories. But this is the first time they've taken a novel and adapted it directly, and I thought it really helped. They've got such remarkable technical gifts, but they have a tendency to sort of wander off into the swamps of their own technique and irony and so forth. And I thought working with someone else's work really sort of helped tether their gifts, and I think it's the strongest movie they've done.
Yeah, no, I basically agree. I mean, I think this is a category where if I had liked There Will Be Blood a little bit better than I did, I would have been inclined to lean towards There Will Be Blood, just because the Coen brothers did a great job, but it was a very faithful adaptation of McCarthy's novel, whereas Paul Thomas Anderson started out with Upton Sinclair's novel Oil, and then sort of used it as a jumping off point for a story that used aspects of the book, but went in very different directions. Really only used about the first third of the novel, and I think you could make an argument that it's actually a more impressively creative adaptation. I just don't think it ultimately worked as well as No Country for Old Men. I
haven't read Oil actually, so. I
haven't read it either, but I've read plot summaries and analyses of the novel, which suggest to me that Anderson did something that had the potential to be more remarkable with the raw material than the Coen brothers did with No Country for Old Men. But
sure.
I have not.
My sense without having read it was that it almost. I mean, it was that he took such creative liberties with it that it was almost an original screenplay. That it was far enough from the original novel. But again, without having seen it or without having read the book, it's hard for me to judge.
Well, the only other in this category, and I think it belongs in adapted screenplay. Maybe I'm misremembering, but what was Zodiac was adapted in part from Robert Graysmith's books about hunting the Zodiac killer.
I think it was adapted fairly closely. I mean, it was more than one book, so it was not a simple adaptation. Right. But that's right, and I think it absolutely deserved a nomination. I think Zodiac really, of all the films this year, I think Zodiac is the one that can be most frustrated with sort of wasted Oscar opportunities. I think if Zodiac had come out in November, it probably would have been nominated for several Oscars, and because it came out in, was it May? I can't remember. Early in the year.
I think it came out in March. I think I remember seeing it in like a drizzly, freezing day, much like this one, actually.
Yes.
But
even worse. But it's a movie, by a director who's a named director. David Fincher has a lot of fans. Had a good cast and was, I think, easily the best film he's made. And was the kind of sort of epic genre movie that I think the Oscars are not unfriendly to. And had it come out in November, I think there's a good chance that particularly if the studio had pushed it, that it might have gotten some real attention. And it's kind of a shame that it didn't.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think the screenplay in particular was, I mean, it was the sort of interweaving the different stories of the different characters who are. It's essentially a story of overlapping investigations of the same essential mystery, and I think there were some weaknesses in it, but I think overall they did a remarkable job. So, all right, well, I'm trying to keep us moving here. So
good.
10 minutes in, and we've only done 2 categories. So let's go to the actors next. Let's go to Best Supporting Actress, where the choices are Tilda Swinton for Michael Clayton, Amy Ryan for Gone Baby Gone, Seors, she of the unpronounceable first name Ronan for Atonement, the Ruby Dee for American Gangster, and Cate Blanchett doing a Bob Dylan impersonation for I'm Not There. And here I am going, my inclination, although I'm sensitive to some people who thought she was hamming it up a little bit, but I think Amy Ryan in Gone Baby Gone probably, 1, will get the nomination, and 2, will get the Oscar, and 2, deserves it. But what do you think? No! Oh, wait! No, wait! I take that back. This is probably going to be a Cate Blanchett win, isn't it?
That would be my guess.
Yeah.
I do think it's basically a two-woman race between Amy Ryan and Cate Blanchett. Ruby Dee somehow won the Screen Actors Guild award, which is peculiar because it was a very small role in a movie that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, American Gangster. But I think it's basically Amy Ryan or Cate Blanchett, and I guess like you, I'm really rooting very strongly for Amy Ryan, both because I thought she was phenomenal in Gone Baby Gone, and that it was an underrated movie. I thought it was really extremely strong. And also because I was less impressed with Cate Blanchett's Bob Dylan impersonation than some were. I mean, I think it was technically very, very strong, but the word you used, I think, kind of hits the nail on the head. It felt like an impersonation more than a real performance. And I also feel that Cate Blanchett has already won one Academy Award for a similar sort of mimetic performance, one that's really a kind of elevated impression for her Katharine Hepburn performance in The Aviator. And there's a certain, this category of sort of mimetic performances that are defined by conveying the mannerisms of a figure that's very familiar to the audience, or by doing a great job at mimicking a particular accent, or doing a good job of suggesting you have the symptoms of a well-known disease. There have been a number of people who've won Oscars for that as well. I find just as a category of performances, one that I don't like that much, and Cate Blanchett, both in The Aviator and I think in I'm Not There, does an absolutely fabulous job of capturing the exterior, but really, for me at least, doesn't really tell me anything I didn't already know, doesn't show me what's behind the familiar sort of face and mannerisms. And I didn't really think she should have won for The Aviator, and I don't really think that she should win for I'm Not There. She's a marvelous actress, but I don't think those have been her strongest performances, partly, again, because I think she concentrates so much on the exterior that she doesn't really reveal anything of the underlying character, or at least not as much as I'd like.
I think it's those sort of roles are they're not impossible in the sense that, as you said, the Academy loves to reward them, but playing a figure who is already a celebrity, it's so tough to find anything, because film acting is ultimately about, surfaces in a way that, say, a characterization in a novel isn't, and you already have, the actual Bob Dylan playing himself, and still alive and so on. I'm hard pressed. Can you think of what you would call a really tremendous performance in which somebody plays someone who is still alive and still a sort of immediate, in-your-face celebrity?
I actually can. I'm glad you asked that, because I was about to say, I think a great counterexample is Christopher Plummer's performance as Mike Wallace in The Insider. I thought he was utterly fantastic. He made very little effort to look like Mike Wallace or sound like Mike Wallace, but he tried to convey who Mike Wallace is. And I thought
that's a really good
spectacular performance. I thought he was amazing. If it had been up to me, he would have won Best Supporting Actor that year. It was up to the Academy, and they, of course, did not even bother to nominate him. But I thought it was one of the great performances of that year, and great in part because he dispensed with the showing us what we already know about Dan Rather, the sort of slightly nasal voice and mannerisms. He just didn't really do any of that. He just tried to embody who he thought Dan Rather was.
You mean Mike Wallace?
I'm sorry, Mike Wallace as a human being, and did I thought, really masterful job.
That's a great example. I'm glad you came up with that. I was thinking, and I didn't like the performance, but I was thinking of Anthony Hopkins' portrayal of Richard Nixon, which I thought sort of tried to straddle the line between, there was a little bit of impersonation, but Hopkins looks ultimately so little like Nixon, even when they made him up and so on, that it was never going to be a sort of Jamie Foxx as Ray Charles performance. Right. And in that sense, I think it actually had enormous potential. I think it was squandered potential in part because the Oliver Stone's movie wasn't very good.
Sure.
But it does seem like
and Nixon is one of those figures who I think is particularly hard because the mannerisms are so well known.
Right.
I think Mike Wallace is a little easier because they're not he has not been the subject of parodies by.
I hardly watched 60 Minutes, so I actually went into that movie without any fixed sense of Mike Wallace, the celebrity, in my mind. And I agree with you that it was a fantastic performance. The only other thing
for my money, the best Nixon was Dan Hedaya in Dick.
In Dick, yeah.
Who I thought channeled him masterfully.
Well, the only in this category, I mean, I did think that Saoirse Ronan was probably the best thing in Atonement.
Once again, couldn't agree more. I thought
we need to find something to disagree about soon.
I know. I thought one of the fundamental flaws in Atonement was abandoning her for another actress. Midway through the film, and an actress who bore astonishingly little physical resemblance to her. I mean, Saoirse Ryan is Irish, is this Irish pixie,
right.
And Romola Garai, who played Bryony when she was older, is I think half Romanian or part Romanian, and they're just they had the same haircut, but they didn't look anything like one another, and it seemed very odd at a time when we're accustomed to a single actor or actress playing a character everywhere from their teenage years to their 60s, that they did not feel in Atonement they could get a single actress who could play the same character at 13 and at 18.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I thought Gary was not bad in that part, but I think it speaks to a larger problem with Atonement, the sort of disjointed, it's sort of a disjointed epic. But
I agree. I thought that first hour was very, that all takes place in one night, was very tight, was very clean. It worked very well, and the second half, much as you said, I thought it just sort of lurched in one direction and then another direction, and Keira Knightley, who you believe to be the main character, is vanishes from the story altogether for the length of a Bible, and the pacing was very sort of awkward.
Yeah. Well, what did you think about Tilda Swinton in Michael Clayton? Because she's the last supporting actress nominee we haven't talked about.
I thought she was very good. She's a very good actress. She was, she's had a number of sort of memorable roles in a couple of Oscar nominations. I didn't think that it was the kind of role that you'd expect to win for. It was very strong, and I think she earned a nomination. But it's not one of those roles that I think of a lot, or sort of want to go back and see again. Particularly, it was I don't know.
Yeah.
Strong, but characteristically strong for her.
Well, Best Supporting Actor seems like a much easier bet in terms of who's going to win. Because we have, to run up, we have Casey Affleck in The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, which is actually a leading performance that's been shoehorned into this category. Philip Seymour Hoffman in Charlie Wilson's War, Hal Holbrook for Into the Wild, Tom Wilkinson for Michael Clayton, and then Javier Bardem for No Country for Old Men. And I would bet a large sum of money that Bardem wins the
You won't bet it with me. I think he's got this one pretty sewn up too.
I mean, I think in another year, Holbrook, who would be a sort of sentimental favorite. I know you hated Into the Wild, but I think he did a really nice job with a sort of small bore part. I think Holbrook might be able to pull it out, but I think Bardem's performance was just so iconic.
And unique. I mean, like the Best Actor category, which we'll get to. It's a character you don't feel you've seen before. I mean, so often even strong performances feel like, it's another iteration of a character that you've seen that actor play before or that you've seen in other films. And I do think that this was one of those cases of an actor creating a true original. You don't see this guy and think, that reminds me a lot of so-and-so. It was really, I thought,
right, and particularly to he is essentially, he's not a serial killer in the mode of Hannibal Lecter, but he is essentially that kind of figure. Mm-hmm. And the serial killer is such, has become such a cliche in American cinema, and to actually do something new with that kind of role, I think is, it's very impressive. I mean, I hated Wilkinson in Clayton. I thought he was just, he's one of those actors who you start out really liking, and then suddenly he's in every single movie, and he's chewing the scenery in every single movie. I mean, it literally feels like he's sort of where he's hit the point that Brian Cox hit a few years ago, and I love Brian Cox, but where it's like, well, we need a 55-year-old white man. We need to cast Tom Wilkinson no matter what the role.
Right. Yeah, I didn't dislike it as much as you, but like you, I was a huge fan of him in The Full Monty, and he had a small but amazingly affecting role, I thought, in Shakespeare in Love. And I do think that I generally agree with you. I didn't mind him in Michael Clayton. I thought he was fine. It was a role that required a certain amount of hamming it up, and I actually thought he hammed it up less than some other actors might have. But like you, it's not a performance that I was particularly fond of.
Okay, well, let's go to the Best Actress category, where I'm going to recuse myself in embarrassment because I have not seen enough of these performances. But the choices are Cate Blanchett again for reprising her role in Elizabeth the Golden Age, Julie Christie in Away From Her, Marion Cotillard in La Vie en Rose, Laura Linney for The Savages, and Ellen Page for Juno. And now we're coming back to the Juno question. But so who do you think is going to win?
Well, I think Cate Blanchett has no shot in this category because the Elizabeth sequel was an absolute disaster. Terrible, terrible movie. I'm surprised she was even nominated for it. I think that Cate Blanchett has some large trove of nude photos of Academy voters somewhere. She seems to be in that sort of Glenn Close in the 80s state where she gets nominated for almost everything she does. She was fine in the movie, but it was a terrible, terrible movie. I don't think she has a chance of winning, and that's a good thing. I don't really think that Laura Linney has any shot either, which is too bad because I love Laura Linney. I think she's a marvelous actress. I think she's actually one of those actresses who is so believable that people tend to underrate her acting because they think that she's not really acting, that she's just being herself.
Right.
And I don't think that's true. I think she's one of the best American actresses working today. Really terrific. But I don't really think she has much of a shot. Savages was a small movie, and it's not really her movie, so I think that's pretty unlikely too. From the beginning, I think people saw this as sort of a Marion Cotillard and
Julie
Christie race. Right. I do think Ellen Page has probably kind of worked her way into the mix there. I think if Julie Christie hadn't already won an Oscar, and she did win one in, I think, 1965 for Darling when she was quite young. If she'd never won one, I think it would be a completely foregone conclusion that she'd win. I still think she's a pretty overwhelming favorite. She's a cinematic icon. She's a nostalgic favorite. She looks better at 66 than anyone I know will ever look a day in their lives. I think she's going to be very hard to beat.
Apart from your wife, you mean?
Of course. And Marion Cotillard, I actually think probably ought to win. I think she really carried La Vie en Rose. She was fabulous in it. And while it's a mimetic performance, I suppose she was impersonating a figure that I did not know intimately enough that I sort of received it in terms of how much she seemed like Edith Piaf. But she was great and carried really almost every scene of the film. Whereas I do think the Julie Christie performance, she plays someone who gets some form of dementia. I can't remember if it's Alzheimer's or not, and sort of her memory quickly fades. And while a very strong performance in a flawed but very good movie, it did have that feeling of a little bit of a movie of the week. This is what it looks like when your 60-something wife gets Alzheimer's. I think Ellen Page does have an outside shot, but I think it's pretty much an outside shot. I just think that people love Julie Christie, and I think there's a sense that Ellen Page is a comer and will probably have lots more opportunities. And Julie Christie, at 66, the number of opportunities you're going to have to win an Oscar is usually diminishing pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty safe bet. I mean, the only thing in this category is precisely because the movies are so little seen, you wonder if a sort of, a small but significant surge for Juno overall could help put Page over the top. Like if there are a certain number of Academy voters who just never got around to seeing La Vie en Rose, for instance, as I admit I did not. But it's true that it's hard to imagine they wouldn't have seen both Away From Her and La Vie en Rose, in which case it does seem like.
Well, and I think that Ellen Page has a much more realistic chance than Marion Cotillard. Anyway, I think there's only been one actress who's won for a role that wasn't in English. Is that right? Now my Oscar trivia is a little weak. But it's an enormous hindrance if you're performing in a foreign language. So I think Julie Christie's the likely winner. Ellen Page is an entirely plausible upset, and Marion Cotillard, while she'll get a good number of votes and I think really deserves very serious consideration, I think she's probably doesn't have much chance just because, whatever, people don't speak French.
Right. I mean, I'm going to be, even though I still haven't seen The Savages, I'm going to be rooting for Laura Linney for all the reasons that you laid out, because she's a fantastic actress who I imagine, deserves to be recognized for something. I wish she'd won for You Can Count on Me, but,
Particularly, it was just, if you ever saw her in interviews after that, it was just so, that was the year that Julia Roberts won. And there was something just very winning about Laura Linney. She knew she'd had the best role of her career to date, and that it might be the best role she ever had. And, what do you do when you're up against Julia Roberts in a movie that made a lot of money and in which Julia Roberts was very good? It's just not going to happen.
And the other thing, and this goes to your point about people almost not recognizing that she's acting, is that in You Can Count on Me, Linney she was paired with Mark Ruffalo, and it was Ruffalo's first big role and arguably his best role. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of the talk about that movie was, oh my God, Mark Ruffalo is so amazing, and Laura Linney's good too.
Yeah,
not that she was ever going to beat Roberts for that was Erin Brockovich, right?
Yes, yeah.
That year, right? So it was Julia collecting her statue, but still, just in terms of how that film is remembered, I think that I think Linney gets less credit than she deserves. Well, turning to Best Actor, with Clooney for Michael Clayton, Johnny Depp for Sweeney Todd, Tommy Lee Jones from The Valley of Elah, Viggo Mortensen, and I was really pleased to see this for Eastern Promises, and then there's no way anyone's beating Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood, right?
No, I can't imagine. It'll be about as close to unanimous as I think an Oscar vote ever gets. It's I think it was George Clooney had a quote in the papers in the last couple of days about being up against Daniel Day-Lewis for Best Actor, where he basically said, I feel a little bit like Hillary Clinton. If not for Barack Obama, I'd probably be having a really good year. And I think that basically sums it up pretty well. I don't really think any of the other actors have any shot at all. Although, like you, once again, and I'm sure everyone is tired of our agreeing, I thought Viggo Mortensen was fabulous in Eastern Promises, best role he's had yet, and I feel like he's, in his last couple movies, sort of shown a level of ability that I did not really suspect he had. And Eastern Promises, I thought, was a sort of middling genre film that he really lifted up into something more than that.
Yeah, the only other person
Plus, there's a 10-minute nude knife fight in the sauna.
Well, right. I mean, that alone seemed to me to, at least push him into contention. But the other person,
you're welcome, studio. I've just gotten you 10,000 new rentals.
The only other person I would have liked to see in this category, rather than in the supporting actor, is Philip Seymour Hoffman. I was not a huge fan of Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, but I thought that his performance in that movie was, I don't know.
I think you've just got my Oscar column in front of you and are just reading it, because that was what I said too. So, sorry everyone. Next time we'll just...
All right, well maybe we can disagree
why don't you play both parts?
Right.
I completely agree. He was fabulous in Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. I did actually want to go back and just briefly say I thought he was also absolutely terrific in Charlie Wilson's War. Not a great movie, a smart entertainment, but he really made it better. And every scene he was in just played a little sharper. I felt like the other performers were better in the scenes that he was in. He just had an edge and an energy in it. An incredibly funny role, but funny in a fierce, slightly dangerous way. Really, really terrific performance. He had a great year. I mean, in the span of 3 months, he had The Savages, which he's also fabulous in, and Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, and Charlie Wilson's War. It's really just an amazing run for him.
Yeah, no, he's fantastic. It's hard to believe that he when you think back on him in the first movie I ever saw him in was Son of a Woman.
Oh gosh, was he in that? I didn't even remember
he was in that. He was in that, and he was one of the lame preppies who screw over Chris O'Donnell. Remember Chris O'Donnell?
Of course, sure.
Chris O'Donnell's Nobel scholarship student, and it's actually fascinating.
Hysterical.
Every time I loathe that movie with a passion, but it's worth going back and watching it just to see the beginning of Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah, he also played I think if I remember correctly, a sort of sad sack, inept policeman in Nobody's Fool, but also an early role before he was.
I've never seen that. Is that any good?
It's good. It's good. It's it's not. I wouldn't say it's great, but it's quite a good movie. And Newman is extremely good.
Newman's
a real reason to see it.
Yeah. All right. So best director. Now we're into the big money. We've got the Coen brothers, of course. Paul Thomas Anderson, of course. Tony Gilroy for Michael Clayton. Jason Reitman for Juno, and Julian Schnabel for The Diving Bell and the Butterfly.
Yeah. It's whatever. It's a strong bunch. I think it's going to come down to the Coens and Paul Thomas Anderson, and I expect that the Coens will pull it out. But I don't. It's hard for me to imagine anyone else really winning that.
Yeah, I mean, Schnabel wasn't. The Diving Bell and the Butterfly wasn't nominated for Best Picture, which generally means you're not going to win. Gilroy and Clayton. I think. It was Gilroy's directing debut. I think he did a good job with the material, but and Reitman, I think. Am I cribbing from your Oscar column again when I say
I believe
he probably didn't get as much credit as he deserved?
You plagiarist.
Yeah, he didn't. Well,
we'll see how that
to continue cribbing, he didn't get as
Ohio.
much credit as he deserved because everybody just paid attention to Diablo Cody. But
yeah, I completely agree. I think that it is a very well directed movie, and when so many things go right, when every one of the performances is as good as the performances were in Juno, when the pacing is as good as it was, I really think you have to look to the director for that as much as the script. And while Diablo Cody does deserve recognition for the script, I really think Jason Reitman. I was surprised he got nominated for Best Director, but I thought it was a good nomination.
Well, and I mean, that script, you could have gone so wrong with that script in so many ways. It felt, I mean, early on, and I think we disagree. You think the first 5 minutes the script was poised on a knife edge.
And you think
I think for the first
5
20 minutes,
20 seconds.
Yeah, the script was poised on a knife edge where it could have just been an utter fiasco. I thought the whole beginning where she's calling the abortion clinic on her hamburger phone and so on was kind of unbearable. But then the movie just settles in and finds a groove where the sort of archness and quirkiness and hipness don't detract from the overall strength of the story. But yeah, so I would agree with you about. I think it's the Coens edging Paul Thomas Anderson, and I think the same thing happens in Best Picture, where the nominees are, again, repeating ourselves: No Country for Old Men, There Will Be Blood, Juno, Atonement, and Michael Clayton. And I think you think No Country's going to win, right?
I do, although I definitely think this one is far from a foregone conclusion. A lot of people didn't really like No Country, and particularly didn't like the last 15 or 20 minutes of it. And I feel like whereas once it had an enormous sort of critical head of steam, and it was the very clear front runner for a while, I feel like the fact that a lot of audiences have been dissatisfied with it has taken a little of that momentum away. I mean, I think it's still a favorite, but and my guess is that it'll win. I also just think it's really hurt by the rise of There Will Be Blood, just because they appeal to a very similar sort of sensibility. They're both artier movies than the Academy usually awards. They're both bleaker movies than the Academy usually gives Best Picture. And I would assume that There Will Be Blood will cut into No Country for Old Men's vote to a considerable degree and make it fairly vulnerable.
Well, my initial assumption was that the two would almost cancel each other out. That there is a certain block of voters who will vote for violent, difficult films set in the American West, and that vote would be split, and then there would be room for some more middle-brow choice to come through.
They were actually, I had read somewhere they were actually filmed within a few miles of one another, and there was a day of shooting on No Country for Old Men that was ruined by a cloud of smoke in the background that was actually one of the burning oil derricks from There Will Be Blood.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, isn't that incredible? They were literally just miles apart in the scrubland of Texas.
It would be funny if Atonement and Juno had also been shot one mile apart from each other
right.
in sub-Saharan Africa or something, yes. And in both cases they doctored the landscape now. But it just doesn't. I mean, I'm assuming No Country is going to win just because it doesn't seem like any of the other contenders have gathered enough of a head of steam.
Yeah, I've kept waiting for a single sort of obvious, more conventional alternative to No Country to to appear. And initially, everyone thought it was going to be Atonement. Atonement was, the favorite to win the Oscar before anyone ever actually saw the movie. And then people saw the movie, and I think were underwhelmed by it, and rightly so. And it still has an outside shot, and it did get a nomination, then get nominated for Best Picture. But I think it kind of limped in, as opposed to coming in with a lot of momentum. And I thought at one point American Gangster just seemed like a very obvious film to get a bunch of nominations, sort of like The Departed, a movie that has a great pedigree, that has stars that the Academy likes, that has a director the Academy likes, that may not be a great film in any way, but is a reasonably satisfying, competent film. And whatever, I thought that it had a chance of emerging as that alternative, and obviously that didn't remotely happen. It has barely been nominated for any awards at all, which I think is actually reasonable, because while it was not a bad movie, it was a very, very familiar movie. And then there was a time when the Screen Actors Guilds gave out their awards and gave a fistful of awards to Into the Wild, when I thought Into the Wild might come out and be the sort of conventional alternative to No Country, and then that didn't happen. It was really stiffed at the Oscars, which made me happy because I don't like the movie. And then when the Oscars finally did come out with their nominations, Michael Clayton had this really quite
had an
surprising
unexpected
number.
boatload of nominations.
Yeah, script and director and 3 acting awards. I mean, a really huge amount. I don't think anyone much foresaw that it would get so many. And I thought, well, maybe it's going to be the conventional alternative, and it's going to win because the arty vote is split between There Will Be Blood and No Country. But it really doesn't seem to have had a lot of buzz since then. I certainly could be wrong, and I wouldn't be astonished if Michael Clayton somehow wound up winning, but I don't think it will. And what I find a little surprising is what seems to have sort of emerged as the more conventional alternative to No Country for Old Men is Juno, which is really not at all a conventional Best Picture choice at all. I mean, in many ways. I mean, partly because it's as profane as it is, and partly because it's as sort of high middle-brow, arty, ironic as it is, and partly because it's a comedy, and comedies never win Best Picture. You have to go back to Annie Hall 30 years ago to find a straight comedy that won Best Picture. I mean, Shakespeare in Love, some people will say, is a comedy, but in addition to being a comedy, it's also a lavish period romance. So I think that if No Country does not win, that Juno most likely will, and it would be a strange upset in many ways, but I think that's the most likely upset.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, like you, I had sort of assumed that either Atonement or something else would become the sort of middle-brow favorite. I mean, one thing that happened is that, typically the sort of, when there's a highbrow, middle-brow war at the Oscars, and I think that those sort of wars make for the most entertaining award ceremonies. But when that happens, the middle-brow movie makes a lot of money, and the highbrow movie doesn't. So, the classic cases would be, Titanic versus L.A. Confidential, for instance. And I think L.A. Confidential isn't the most highbrow movie ever made, but it was certainly the highbrow favorite that year, and I think it grossed, $40 or $50 million, and Titanic obviously grossed $60 billion. And what you see this year is, Atonement, Michael Clayton, certainly Into the Wild. None of those movies did anything at the box office. And the only one that did do something is Juno, right? Yeah. Which started out looking like, it would be seen by everyone who liked Arrested Development and everyone who goes to see Wes Anderson. It's sort of the Wes Anderson to Arrested Development axis of hipness.
That's true.
Or maybe Wes Anderson as of 2 years ago, but instead, it ended up, it's grossed more than $100 million, and so it's far and away.
Anyone would have imagined that it was going to make more money than Atonement. Everyone assumed that Atonement was going to be the Titanic of this year, and it wasn't. And it wasn't.
One thing is you shouldn't cast. I think there's this idea that Keira Knightley is, a enormously appealing female romantic lead. That seems to have filtered throughout Hollywood over the past 5 years. I think this is deeply mistaken.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I mean, Atonement had all kinds of problems, and I think a lot of the problems have their root in Ian McEwan's novel, which is brilliant in many ways, but I think, ultimately, I think it's almost afraid of its own power as a novel, and that McEwan. I mean, there's the famous twist at the end where, spoiler alert, a large chunk of the plot is revealed to have been fictional, and I mean even within the context of the fiction, and has been created as the main character's novelization of her sister and her sister's lover's past. So there's that. I mean, that kind of twist is obviously almost death, no matter what, to a cinematic adaptation. But there's,
I agree.
but there's
And Atonement really screwed it up by making it an admission made on national television. I mean, in the novel, the whole point is that she wants her fictions to usurp reality. She wants her fictions to take the place of reality. She wants future generations to believe that her fictions were real and what really happened didn't happen. And that just doesn't make any sense if you get on national television and tell everyone. I mean, it struck me a very, very difficult ending to find a way to do, but the way they found was the wrong way.
But even allowing that ending was always going to be problematic. I think that the way McEwan sets up the novel as essentially a series of 3 discrete set pieces. First, the set piece at the country house, which I think you rightly praised as the strongest part of the movie, the initial betrayal and so forth. Then the set piece on the road to Dunkirk, which again summons up. It's not as effective a dramatic set piece overall, but it summons up this amazing scene on the beach, this 5-minute tracking shot that is just a remarkable piece of staging and filmmaking, I think. And then this final segment
that I felt brought the movie to a just utter standstill. Again, this is an issue of pace. I thought that it was plopped in there. You could take that scene out of the movie and you wouldn't notice that it wasn't there. And there in the middle, it just seemed like a sort of fetishization of set design. A really powerful but very show-offy, I thought.
Well, I think it belonged
in which the whole movie just like stops. It ends, and you watch this for 5 minutes, and then it's almost like you've just concluded a very beautiful commercial break, and now we go back to our story.
Right, but it in a different movie though, in a movie that had a more coherent arc. For instance,
I think it could be marvelous. Yeah,
right. I mean, when you think of to take the example of Titanic, actually, which I think has become a somewhat underrated movie because it had such a terrible script and was such a huge hit. But I think there are sections of Titanic that, while not that aren't quite as technically impressive as that shot of Dunkirk, but do similar work where you're sort of the camera roves through the sinking ship and sort of it steps away from the romantic leads to show you the broader tapestry.
You look at this when you look at from the stern of the ship down into the water hundreds of feet below and see the people falling. It was amazing cinema. It was very
right.
Very
Or when it cuts from like the dishes falling off the shelves to the the water rising up the marble staircases and so on. And the scene at Dunkirk in a movie that had a more coherent arc set in and around
Dunkirk.
Dunkirk, or just the general disasters that befell Britain from 1940 to 41. The scene would have been fantastic, but as it was, it's just sort of, as you said, you could have taken it out of the movie and you wouldn't have noticed.
Should we talk about movies that were not nominated that ought to have been, things that people might have missed, great overlooked movies of 2007? It was a terrific year for film, I think, particularly the last few months.
It was. Well, we already talked a little bit about Zodiac. I think I would put that at the top of my list for movies that should have been nominated in place. I mean, I think you and I would agree the Academy got three right. Juno, No Country for Old Men, and even though I have some problems with it, There Will Be Blood. And then both Atonement and Michael Clayton. I actually enjoyed both Atonement and Michael Clayton, but I think they were sort of ultimately artistic failures.
Sure.
So you have two
I think
more
I like
plots.
Michael Clayton probably a little more than you, and Atonement a little less. But in general, I agree. If there were two movies that should not have been nominated, those were the two.
I think I liked Michael Clayton. I think I liked Michael Clayton more in retrospect, and I enjoyed Atonement while I was watching it, but found it completely unmemorable afterwards. I was irritated by Michael Clayton while I was watching it, and then afterwards I was like, hey, that was kind of entertaining. But anyway, so back to the subject at hand. For overlooked movies, I mean, I think Zodiac is an obvious pick. I think I liked Eastern Promises more than you did. I mean, I agreed that Mortensen's performance hoisted it to a higher level. But I think that overall, I actually liked it a lot better than A History of Violence, which was, I think, got more critical laurels. It was also a David Cronenberg, Viggo Mortensen sort of, typically Cronenbergian well, not typically Cronenbergian, a sort of departure for Cronenberg, a more accessible version of in both cases of what he does. But I preferred Eastern Promises. I thought it held together better than A History of Violence, and it sort of, it was a slight movie in a lot of ways, but it had the feeling of sort of, a kind of dark, small fairy tale almost.
Right. I agree. I think it was a better movie than A History of Violence. I think A History of Violence had the potential to be a better movie. I think that once it's revealed whether or not Viggo Mortensen is, now I forget his name, the name of the Philadelphia assassin who he may or may not be. Up until then, I think it's a superior movie. I think it's really a fabulous sort of existential puzzle, among other things. But the minute you know the answer to that, I just feel like the air goes out of the movie, and the last half hour I thought was really disappointing, especially a just weird, over-the-top performance.
William Hurt, yeah.
But William Hurt, in a very naturalistic, sort of realistic film, he's got this weird sort of hammy performance that doesn't seem to fit at all. Anyway, I'd agree with you. I think Eastern Promises was a better movie because it sustained its strengths throughout, whereas A History of Violence seemed like it was going to be a really, really interesting film. And my view is we should never have learned whether or not he was... I can't remember the character's name. You can imagine a film in which he even, you'd have to change it in some ways, but even he goes to Philadelphia and does some of the things that he does with William Hurt while denying all the time that he is this figure,
right.
William Hurt's gangster brother. And William Hurt keeps saying, "You are him, I know you are," and he keeps saying, "No, I'm not." And whatever. I think that the tension there could have been sustained throughout the whole movie, possibly. And it wasn't, and I just thought that the last third of the movie really was kind of limp.
I agree, though. I also thought that I didn't find what I liked about Eastern Promises in part was that it was an exotic milieu, which it's sort of the seedy underbelly of immigrant London, where with Russian gangsters, which is obviously a world I know very little about.
Russian gangsters played by actors from every country you can think of, except Russia.
Except Russia, yeah. Armin Mueller-Stahl.
French, German, Danish, right. Argentinian, American.
Yeah. Well, and Viggo Mortensen was the only one they said who really nailed the Russian accent.
Right.
But again, like I can't tell the difference between a good and a bad Russian accent. So the suspension of disbelief was very easy. Whereas in A History of Violence, I sort of felt like it was a movie about the American heartland made by someone who has spent about as much time in the American heartland as I have spent in the seedy underbelly of immigrant London. Like it just sort of and it worked okay, but it was just sort of It didn't seem, that movie never felt realistic to me. It never felt rooted in real Americana. It felt like it was like one-third Norman Rockwell, one-third like gang.
But I think that's right. I think it was a movie more about the idea of sort of idyllic rural America rather than a movie that was supposed to be about the reality of rural America. It was a little like, I don't know, Miller's Crossing or something like that, where it is establishing a stereotype and deliberately so.
Right.
Running the coffee shop. I mean, all these scenes that could have been taken straight out of the past. So I think it was sort of referring back to previous movies about people who'd escaped, into sort of decent rural America and playing off an idea of decent rural America that it knows is not really true. Anyway, but let's move on. What else?
Well, you like Gone Baby Gone, right?
I like Gone Baby Gone a lot. I don't think I would go so far as to say that it should have been nominated for Best Picture, but I thought it was a very good genre film that in its last 5 or 10 minutes really became something more. I thought it was directed by Ben Affleck, and much as it surprises and pains me to say so, it was not only a really strong movie, but a very brave one, particularly the ending, where he sets up a real moral dilemma, and he actually, unlike, say, Clint Eastwood in $1 Million Baby, he actually weights the movie against the ultimate decision of the protagonist in pretty much every way you can imagine. I mean, he doesn't let him off the hook. He basically implies that this is the decision that will result in more pain for more people, that will create long-standing problems that may never be solved. Where the alternative is something that just seems very neat and easy and will make the problem go away. But the movie ultimately comes down saying that that's not the right thing to do, and sometimes the solution that makes the problem seem to go away is not the right solution. Anyway, so I thought it was very strong. I don't think I'd say it should have been a Best Picture nominee, but it's definitely worth seeing. Very, very good movie, and again, the ending in particular, really strong.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't put it in a top 5. I don't think, but I think, given that we have a sort of somewhat genre entertainment in the top 5 in the form of Michael Clayton, I think that I could. I think Gone Baby Gone was a stronger movie than Michael Clayton.
I agree
was biased against it a little bit, just this is just a case where I'd happened to read the book 2 months before I saw the movie, and the book, it's a very faithful adaptation. As far as it goes, I think it is a case where the book is really terrific, and all of the stuff that you like about the movie is in the book. Plus, it's just the plot is a little more tangled, and it's just sort of a richer evocation of that particular world than is really, to be fair, is really possible in a 2-hour movie. But so that biased me against it a little bit. But I did think, I thought it was quite good. I thought it was a surprising achievement for Ben Affleck.
Yeah, me too. So you did finally see the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
I did.
What did you think?
You would put that where on your top 10 list?
I had put that at number 1 for the year.
Right. Yes.
We'll talk in a minute about whether I still think it belongs there.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this a little bit beforehand because I, of course, saw it on DVD, and you saw it in the theater, and I can certainly see that it's a movie that would make a very different impression on a big screen than on a small screen. Its virtues, particularly the cinematography, are, I think, obviously better appreciated on the big screen. Its weaknesses, including its ponderous length, are in a way harder to take when you're sitting on a couch and have lots of other distractions around.
Yeah.
I thought it was an interesting movie. I think it didn't succeed ultimately, but I thought it was interesting. I thought it actually had the reverse problem of There Will Be Blood. There Will Be Blood, I thought, was absolutely fantastic until the final 20 to 25 minutes. I thought The Assassination of Jesse James started out very strongly, and then it never established any real narrative momentum in its central. Its central pairing is Casey Affleck as Robert Ford and his relationship to Brad Pitt's Jesse James, and sort of how this leads to the inevitable conclusion where, as the title suggests, Ford shoots James. I just sort of it took way too long, and it never really moved. And I thought it was interesting to compare it. Initially, the movie it made me think of was The Talented Mr. Ripley, where you have a similar pairing of there it was Jude Law as Dickie Greenleaf and Matt Damon as Ripley, of a sort of weaker secondary character who falls in love with, in some sense.
Sure.
And in that movie it was homosexual, in this movie it wasn't, but you have a similar sort of love affair turned sour that ends in murder. And I just thought that contrasting those two...
But it's a good one.
Yeah, and The Talented Mr. Ripley just had so much more dynamism in its middle sections. But then the ending of The Assassination of Jesse James, where there's like this long 20-minute section after the assassination where you follow Robert Ford through his life as the man who killed Jesse James. I knew that was coming, having read reviews of the movie, and since I was sort of tired of the movie by that point, I was dreading it. I was ready for the movie to be over, but then I thought that was actually one of the strongest parts of the movie, and it regained some of what it had lost, and regained the sort of, it's obviously an elegy for the West combined with a meditation on the rise of, celebrity in American life and so on. And I thought the last 20 minutes did a lot more for that than, the hour and 40 minutes in the middle that came before. But
yeah, I would not disagree with that. I only saw it once in theaters. I would really have liked to have seen it a second time in theaters, and whatever, it wasn't in theaters long enough for me to see it a second time. And I did see it on video subsequently. And I'm not one of these videophiles who talks authoritatively about black levels and artifacts and things, but I did think it was a fairly indifferent video transfer. And in any case, the film is so gorgeous on the big screen, really just beautiful to look at and enveloping in a certain way that it just would never be on a TV screen. It was a very different experience, and like you said, the movie felt much, much longer sitting watching it at home than it did in the theater. I thought it was too long when I saw it in the theater, but in a way that it might be too long, but I enjoyed every moment of it. And seeing it at home, not so much as you say. But like you, I thought the last 10 or 15 minutes were the best part of it. A lot of people talking about the movie focused on the idea of Brad Pitt as Jesse James and how they're both celebrities and so forth. And I think that actually is a deep and fundamental misreading of the movie. Jesse James wasn't a celebrity. Jesse James was a myth. Jesse James was something that we don't have anymore today. He was a nighttime story. He was somebody that you scared your children with when they misbehaved. I mean, he was a larger-than-life figure of a kind that I just don't think exists anymore. And for me, the film was about that moment where myth is killed by mere celebrity. Yeah. Where in killing Jesse James, Robert Ford gets this parasitic taste of James's faith, but it very quickly curdles. At first he's very famous and people like him, and he reenacts the murder on Broadway for a few years, but then gradually over time people come to realize what they've lost, and that Robert Ford is nothing like Jesse James. Jesse James was this towering figure, and Robert Ford is this dumb little coward who had a pistol. And sentiment gradually curdles, and you have the troubadour who comes in and sings the whole song about that coward, that
Right.
ugly little coward Robert Ford, and eventually he's killed by somebody else, and the person he's killed by goes to prison, but there are thousands and thousands of petitions to let the man out, because everybody has basically decided that Robert Ford deserved to be killed. Anyway, not to give anything away.
I guess, one thing I'd say, though, is I didn't... And I don't think this is a fault in Pitt's performance. I think it's a fault in the script or how it was done. I didn't get the sense of James as a towering figure, and I understand that the movie was trying to look at him. It's looking at this guy after he's done sort of making his own myth and sort of in decline. But
yeah, I mean, what I liked about that was you compare it to sort of 310 from Yuma, the other Western that came out around the same time, in which the bandit is played much more charismatically. And what I thought worked about that in the assassination of Jesse James is Jesse James is at a point where he doesn't have to impress anyone anymore. He doesn't have to be remarkable because everyone around him is terrified of him already. You see his myth not in him, but in the way he's treated by people near him. Just the dark cloud that seems to hover behind him whenever anyone else is speaking to him. I thought the movie did that well, and that there'd be a real temptation for Brad Pitt to try to come out and give a really big performance. And I thought the fact that he didn't, I thought was actually kind of sharp. Anyway, I think we probably need to wrap this up pretty quickly. I don't know if there are any other movies you wanted to plug. There were two others I wanted to plug briefly, but if there's any others that you'd like to.
Well, if I could make an anti-plug.
Okay.
Since I've been doing a lot of that. I mean, the other sort of pseudo category here is best animated film. And the obvious winner there is going to be Ratatouille, which I think that even though of course it didn't get nominated for Best Picture, as animated movies never do except for Beauty and the Beast, I think it was one of the best reviewed movies of the year. Inspired more rapture than almost any movie that came out, with the exception of There Will Be Blood. And I thought it was just really deeply mediocre, and I was sort of baffled by the critical reception, particularly coming on the heels of Brad Bird's last film, The Incredibles, which just seemed to me to be a superficially similar film that worked better on almost every level. I thought that Ratatouille was a lovely movie to look at, but I thought it had absolutely no... its characters had no life. The characters were all flat from the main character. I mean, part of the problem was it had a split protagonist. It had both the human protagonist and the rat protagonist, and neither of them really achieved sort of roundedness. But some of it, like just all the supporting players, except for the character of the critic, which I think was one of the reasons critics liked it so much. Except for that character, all of the other characters, it just seemed like a B-level children's movie.
Even when you say something this controversial, where I ought to just completely disagree with you and tell you you're being a fool, I liked it better than you did, I think, but I agree with your general take that it was overpraised. I certainly agree The Incredibles is a better film. I think The Incredibles is a marvelous film, rich and deep and emotionally affecting and thoughtful and philosophical in ways that I just don't think Ratatouille quite was. I thought Ratatouille was a very good Pixar movie. Not only do I not think it was the best, I don't think it was the second best. There are others I would put above it, including Monsters, Inc. So, in general, I have to concur with you that while it was a very good movie, it was not what many people treated it as sort of this transcendent moment in the history of American animation. I was not blown away by it either.
Well, thank you for letting me get that off my chest. What else did you want to plug?
Two more quick plugs. One is Once, which I mentioned earlier, tiny Irish musical romance made for $100,000. All of it was supplied by the Irish Film Board. Just a magical, marvelous little movie, and a movie that I think takes an extremely mature and thoughtful view of love, and doesn't think that love is denied, that love which is denied ceases to be love or has to be tragic or anything like that. Really a marvelous, marvelous little movie. And the second is 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, which I know you haven't seen yet.
I haven't seen it. I'm going to.
As everyone would refer to it, it's the Romanian abortion movie. It is astonishing. Grim, powerful, very, very, very intimate, but not without hope. It really, when I did my list of the best movies at the end of the year, I hadn't yet seen it, and it would have been very near the top. It's really a magnificent film. It's not a film to see before you intend to go out to a cocktail party or something, but it's really masterful. It's as good as everyone has said that it is, and I had wondered when I first heard the rave reviews of it if it was garnering rave reviews because it was a truly great film, or because it was seen as a pro-choice movie. And I think the answer is very clearly the former. This is not the Cider House Rules. It's a really, really excellent film, and one that I think is quite ambivalent about. Well, ambivalent maybe not the right word. Anyway, see it, and maybe we can have a talk about that. We talked about abortion and Juno for hours, and I imagine we could do the same with this.
Well, yeah, I'll try, and I think it'll end up being sort of like The Lives of Others, which is another European film about life under totalitarianism. Was technically a film of 2006, but really, for me, was one of the best films of the last year, because I saw it in spring of this year. It seems like
I love The Lives of Others. I think this is an even better film.
Interesting. Well, I don't have anything else that I love that I would plug. The only things we didn't talk about, there were a few sort of smallish films that I had fondness for, that I didn't think worked entirely, but I really enjoyed The Hoax, which came out an awful long time ago with Richard Gere as the guy who forges Howard Hughes' diary, and I think it fell apart at the end.
Yeah, it was a movie that I liked a lot, and then I agree, kind of fell apart, and I ultimately almost completely forgot, but a good movie.
Yeah, no, I was just looking back over movies I forgot. The other thing that I saw recently that I think was, again, ultimately an unsuccessful movie, but contained some remarkable stuff, was We Own the Night, which I don't think you liked. Did you?
I actually did not see We Own the Night.
Finally, one you didn't see.
Yeah.
It's worth seeing. I think it's interesting to contrast it with American Gangster, because I think they're both films that show the limits of those kind of genres. This is they're both like cops and mafia movies. This one focuses more on the cops. American Gangster focuses more on the mafia. And they're both sort of going back to a well that people have gone to many, many times before, and they aren't doing anything that's all that new with it. I think that American Gangster was. I think they're a similar level of quality, actually. And American Gangster got more attention and made more money, while not being as good as the amount of attention it got. We Own the Night, I think, was slightly better than the amount of attention it got, and even though it ultimately doesn't work, I think it could have used actually an extra, it's a rare movie that could have used an extra half hour of sort of characterological padding, you might say. But it contains a couple really great set pieces, including a sort of car chase / assassination in the rain that's set to sort of the beat of the windshield wipers that almost makes the movie worth seeing for it alone.
Yeah,
so that would be one of my plugs. And I guess with that we should just wrap it up and see what happens in a couple nights.
Yeah, we'll have to talk again after the awards actually come out.
Absolutely. Well, it's always a pleasure, Chris.
Yeah, likewise, Ross. Thanks a lot for talking, and hope we get to do this again sometime soon.
I'm sure somebody will let us.
All right, thanks. Take care.
Yep, bye.